Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alliance of Independent Authors Advanced Self-Publishing Salon with me, Joanna Penn, and Orna Ross. Hi, Orna.
Hi, Joanna, and hello, everyone.
Here we are again.
Yes, and we have a treat for you this evening. Slight change of format from our usual, because we're going to be talking about AI, artificial intelligence, and how authors can use it as a tool to make better books and reach more readers. And of course, we have the living expert on writing books and AI. We are lucky to have her as part of our own fold. Joanna's been doing so much research on this and has just brought out a book, and we're going to drill down into just some aspects of it because it's a huge topic, right?
Yeah, we're specifically going to be talking about writing in an age of artificial intelligence and some of the things that crosses into. But before we get into that as the topic of this evening, or today, whenever you're listening, we're going to just give some news and updates as usual. So, Orna, do you want to give an update on what's going on with Ally?
Yes, so we have a few campaigns that are kind of taking up a lot of our time at Ally at the moment. Most listeners, I think, at this point will have heard about Audiblegate, which is ACX and audiobooks. So a while back we had to downgrade ACX very reluctantly because it's a platform that has done so much great stuff for audiobook authors, but there were issues around returns and their exchange policy, which I'm not going to go into now. It can be found on the website under our campaigns page. But people are saying to me, it's audiobooks, and also why is Ally, the independent authors organization, dissing Amazon, which has been such a fantastic service for us all. And we partnered up a bit with the Authors Guild and the Society of Authors, two of the largest author representative bodies, to kind of push this campaign and have some dialogue with Audible. But the reason being is that it really is very important, because it is a very unusual case whereby it seems to be, and this has not been denied or confirmed by Audible, but it seems that authors' accounts, essentially some money has been deducted from author accounts, and there's no transparency and no way of authors finding out what's going on. And as business owners with our business partners, we absolutely have to have that sort of transparency. Now, the service, we have had some concessions. The service is talking about, has reduced the exclusivity time on Audible, has got rid of the 7-year lock-in, which we're really delighted about, and really pleased to see these concessions coming through. But we do need the substantive issue addressed, which is, has this money gone missing? And if it has, then that needs to be acknowledged and compensated. So it's important for everybody, whether you do audiobooks or not. It's really important that these things are held accountable. So that's one thing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, yes, we can have great partners, but it's we're married, both of us are married, and there's give and take in a marriage. But equally, if someone's behaving badly in a way that you want to deal with it, you don't just want to let things slide, because things will get worse and worse. And I feel that's one of the examples here is, yes, Amazon's amazing, Audible's brilliant in so many ways, ACX is great, but we've got to police the things so that the relationship continues in a mutually respectful manner, because we are partners, as you say, and this is part of being an independent author. It's part of being an empowered creator, is actually sticking up for yourself, and we are stronger together. And of course, the Alliance is set up for that reason, that we are stronger together. So thank you to you, and obviously to all the people working in the Fair Deal for authors and narrators and rights holders, and Susan May and all of the group. Just fantastic job. So yeah, well done.
Well, it really is down to Susan and her group, and the pressure that's coming out of that pressure group, and the work that they're doing at the research level of gathering the evidence that is, allowing us to, anything that's happening is really coming because that author empowerment is there. And I think that's a big difference. We're seeing a difference. The very act of this kind of campaigning going on is further empowering to the whole community, as I said, not just those with audiobooks. So yeah, there is that campaign, and then there's a couple of other campaigns as well. So it all seems to be about services this month. We also, I'm happy to say, on the other side, on a positive balancing note, is January is when we bring out our directory of approved partners, and that has just issued, so members can find it by logging into the member zone and just going to services and directory and download it there. And it's available for sale in the Self-Publishing Advice bookshop. So
Fantastic.
what are you up to?
Well, I am in editing. I've got the massive printout on my desk, and this is How to Make a Living with Your Writing, the 3rd edition. And what has been brilliant is I thought, as non-fiction writers, we have to do these new editions every now and again. The last one was 2017, and I thought, it will just be a small rewrite, as you do. And I did a survey, so I've had over 750 authors, and it was basically, what are your different streams of income? And I have ended up adding so much to the book. I've loved seeing all the different ways that people are making income, and I've got lots of ideas now for projects I want to do. And also I was going to say, because you did crowdfunding years ago now, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, for Secret Rose, and crowdfunding has changed so much in the last sort of 5 years, and I think a lot of the things that those of us who've been around a while have thought about. So this is my 15th year in the self-publishing world. 2006 was when I started, so I'm like, well, of course you have to re-examine the things that you might have put aside years ago and have another look. So I'm really excited about it. It'll probably be out by the end of March, but so good to see what people are doing. And I was very heartened to see that selling direct was 3rd on the list for how people are making money. So that's really interesting, and I'll be doing a blog post on that. So that's what I'm doing. I'm editing non-fiction, and I'm so wanting to get back into fiction. I'm in that, can I just finish this stage?
Yes, I sympathise.
And what about you?
Yeah, it's similarly, though, a little. I have started back writing fiction, but I still have a lot of publishing mop-up to do on the non-fiction. So I'm kind of running those two side by side, dying to get back into, just more writing and less publishing. But that will be the next quarter. It looks like everything always takes longer than I think it's going to take. Always.
As ever.
As ever. Yeah, exactly. But on the publishing fiction side, I am going to bring out a centenary edition of my very first novel, and first and second novels after the Rising and Before the Fall. It's 100 years since the events that are described in the past section of the novel happened. So it was all happening back in 1921 to 23. So it seems like a good time. And I got a new cover with Jane and doing BookBub ads. Thank you, Joe, for introducing me to BookBub ads. So yeah, putting a BookBub ad on that and just playing around with it, really. And that's a bit of fun. So
yeah, a bit. Well, we should shout out to David Gockran's book, BookBub Ads Expert, which is amazing book and is what helped me sort out BookBub ads. And then I showed Orna, did a bit of a tutorial. So yeah, I highly recommend that book, BookBub Ads Expert, if you want to get into BookBub ads yourself. Okay, well, should we get into our topic for today, which is writing in an age of artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. And I think, the very words are probably enough to make people think, this is nothing to do with me. And I want to say, stop, come back here. It has. That's the first thing. This is important. And I think there are lots of, when we read about artificial intelligence in the press, in the mainstream press generally, it's all about the robots are coming for our jobs, and it's a terrible thing. And there's a lot of fear, and there's very primal sort of fear, I think, in this. But that's not what we're talking about here. And you've been investigating artificial intelligence now for quite some time, and you're very excited by it and about it, unlike most authors, I have to say. So we're going to get the benefit of your experience. But before I do talk to you about all these things, I do want to say that it really is important for us all to get our heads around this, because artificial intelligence is a tool, and it is a tool that's going to be used already. I was so surprised, when I did a beta read on your book, and it introduced me to so much. I was amazed at how much is here already. I had this kind of sense this is something that's in the future, but actually this is something that is really, really happening now. And there are so many ways in which I can see that it can we can use this for our writing as a tool. So that's what we've got to think of it as, something that we take hold of and work with, not run away from. And I think that's your main message, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just as we're using right now, we're using the internet, we use Scrivener to write, we're using StreamYard to stream this. We use tools in our author life to create, to edit. I use Pro Writing Aid, we use Google Search, we use Facebook, all of these things, YouTube, all of these things are driven by various forms of artificial intelligence. So I guess just to start with, that is really important. We're not talking about general artificial intelligence as much as actually I would love to clone myself and just say, right, AI Joe, do all of that stuff that I don't want to do. That we know that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about something that's just going to press a button and out pops a book, or any of that. Maybe unfortunately sometimes, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about narrow AI, which is specific expertise in an area. So for example, someone emailed me the other day and said, why would I even bother writing with AI? And I was like, well, why would you bother emailing me when you could send me a letter? Or why would you bother using Google to search? Why don't you use an encyclopedia at your library? There are things we do to do shortcuts to improve our process. We use these tools every day. So now we're going to talk about natural language generation. So essentially, these are algorithms. They'll just use the word algorithm, a thing that is trained on a big data set of words. So if you imagine the whole of the internet put into an algorithm, and then it generates words and strings of words from that data set. So natural language generation, that's what we're talking about now. So the specific tool that we're really talking about in this area is called GPT-3, which was released in the middle of 2020 by a company called OpenAI. And there's been a lot of hype, but many people have said it is a big leap forward for this kind of text generation. And the thing that probably changed it even more was the fact that it is licensed to Microsoft now. So we're going to start seeing these tools emerging into the things that people use every day in the workplace, but also there are lots of new tools you can basically license the API and use that to build tools on. So some of the things we're going to talk about have been built on top of GPT-3. So I guess, does that make sense so far?
Makes sense to me, so presumably it's going to make sense to other people, but I have had the advantage of reading your book. But yes, I mean, essentially, I think we can understand it so far.
Okay.
The thing is that AI is being used right now. We're not waiting for anything. We're not saying this is all going to happen in 5 years' time, which we kind of, with blockchain, I think we're not seeing actual practical implementation stuff for writers just yet, publishers, but we are seeing AI tools being used in writing at the moment. Talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to use a quote with this from Kevin Kelly, who's like the guru of so many of us, who says in his book, The Inevitable, and I have a whole load of resources that I'll recommend towards the end, but he says, this is not a race against the machines. If we race against them, we lose. This is a race with the machines. You'll be paid in the future based on how well you work with robots. It is inevitable. Let the robots take our jobs and let them help us dream up new work that matters. And that is the crux of it, really, is, okay, what can we get rid of and what do we want to keep? And that's what I love. And I also just read a quote today by the founder of Huawei, a Chinese company, who said, with the help of AI, one person will be able to do the work that is done by 10 people today. And that's interesting for us as indie authors, because I certainly spend a hell of a lot of my time doing stuff that I would really love to use more tools for. And I do use a lot of tools. We've had a whole show on different tools. There's blog posts on that on Ally. You did the whole self-publishing conference on tools, right? But this is very exciting. So I want everyone to think about, how do we come to this with an open attitude of artistic curiosity? How do we work with these tools to work with like another brain? Like you and I, even though we're good friends, we have very different brains. Sometimes we talk to each other and we entirely miss each other. We're like, I meant that and you meant that. How did we not get together on that topic? And this is almost the way of co-writing with a brain, in inverted commas, that is not like our own. So that's creatively exciting, but also, how do we use these tools to do the work that we don't necessarily want to be doing, or to make it easier?
Yeah. So it's already being used. It's being used in lots of different contexts. So let's start with nonfiction, which I think is where we see the most advanced use, if I'm right. Talk to us a little bit about some of the examples of what's happening in newsrooms and other nonfiction spaces.
Sure. Well, for a start, I am curating a list at thecreativepen.com/AI writing. So we'll put links in the show notes, but you can see the extensive list that I'm putting in, and I'm going to be adding, like, as in literally today, as I'm talking, a new one popped up on my phone and I tried it out and I put it on the list. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's quite tech savvy in the US, and she said, "Oh, this stuff is amazing. I just press a button and it's pretty much finished." And I said to her, "Yeah, maybe, but that's because you do content writing and SEO copywriting, which is not quite the same as a lot of people who'll be listening to this who write books." But the very first thing is, writers do quite a lot of copywriting. We might do blogging. We also have journalists in the audience. So journalism particularly is interesting because the industry has been using AI generation for over 4 years now. I can find evidence of 4 years worth. This is increasing all the time. Roughly a third of the content on Bloomberg News uses some form of automated technology. And some of these media companies have their own in-house custom solutions. So the Washington Post has Heliograph, Forbes has a thing called Bertie. The BBC has a thing called the Juicer, which is interesting. So this is definitely everywhere. There are companies like Narrative Science, Automated Insights, and United Robots. If you go and look on their websites, they do the big money industries, pharmaceuticals, the financial industry, sports reporting. They essentially take a data feed and turn it into narrative. So once the human has structured a report, this feeds real-time information like a ticker, like a stock ticker into it, or sports report, results, and produces narrative. It's also report generation, like financial reports, things like that. So you can see if your job involves this kind of thing, then learning to use these tools is going to be really important. And then I
was going to say, well, my job involves writing blurbs and ads and things like that, and there is actually a tool for that. Isn't that right?
Well, there are lots of tools. And what you've got to think with this area is, where's the money? And there is clearly money in the ad space, the content marketing space. So this is where we see the most number of tools appearing. So as you mentioned, and some of these, I had a look at the pricing. You can now get some of these tools for $19 a month. The one I was looking at here, copysmith.ai, writes ads, descriptions, metadata, landing pages, blog posts, and more in seconds. There are industry-specific ones like Phrasee for the travel industry, retail, telecom, different. Even one was interesting because my husband's in the pharma industry. This site called Isiop or Aesop, which is an augmented medical writer. It's a lot of medical writing, which is quite highly paid compared to some other things where you can now do a lot of this generation. So what I would say is, in this area, and the one that popped up today I was mentioning to you is called usetopic.com, which helps you structure and write articles with a guided prompt generator. Really, really interesting. So I guess my challenge here is, if you're a freelance writer, if you do advertising copy, if you do content marketing, copywriting, any of that kind of nonfiction stuff, how could you possibly use these tools to make your job easier? What they tend to do, I've had a look at a lot of them, is generate maybe 30 headlines and then you choose, so there's still human curation involved. So it's a bit like the DeepL for AI translation, which is an 80-20 rule. Yeah, it gets about 80% right for nonfiction. And then it needs about 20% of human curation and making it into a voice, putting a particular angle on it. So I guess that's a sort of overview of the sort of nonfiction. Let's say that it's not narrative nonfiction, it's not the creative nonfiction, if you get what I mean. I don't want to offend anyone, but you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely. It's less literary and more practical nonfiction.
What do you think about that?
I think it's great. I mean, I think it depends. I had to play around with a few of the tools, from that you've recommended before, and I found that it's a bit laborious, and you need to go into it more. But I absolutely love the idea, even in terms of getting ideas for headlines, because you know the way sometimes you've written an article and the last thing you want to do, or you've written a book, the last thing you want to do is summarize it. The last thing you can do, actually your brain won't do that for you. I think to have the tool, even as an idea prompt at minimum, but to give you that first draft seems great. I think there is a learning curve, like everything, where learning how to prompt it, how to give it good orders to get it to do what you want it to do, and what you're putting in terms of what you get back. So it's not something that you kind of, well, for me so far, and this may be me because rather than the poor machine, but it's not something for me so far that I haven't yet gone, oh yes, I'm taking that now and I'm going to use it. But I haven't gone into it, in fairness, in any great detail.
And your job's not really, content creating 20 articles a week on particular topics, which some people's are, or, advertising agencies now using this. The other one I saw, which I think authors might love, is one of the things we all hate is emailing. Like we don't want to do the monthly emails or whatever. Like, I don't know many people who love that. There is now an email generator where if you just put in a number of words, it will generate you a draft for your email, which is not even the complete. You just put in some and it generates something in proper language. So this type of stuff, I think, will save time. And as you say, it might enable you to be more creative because you get to curate, the things that are good and edit those.
Definitely. And for me, if you're the kind of writer who hates the first draft, some writers love the drafting process and don't like editing. I'm the opposite. I love edit. Give me something and I can work on it, but the blank page kind of bores me. So having that ability to generate a draft easily and then play with it, I like. But what about creative writing? What about more literary stuff? You hear everybody saying, oh, it will never do that. Artificial intelligence, a robot could never generate a poem, could never tell a decent story. Wrong, right?
Yeah. And I think, again, it's the mistake of thinking that something has to be exactly like our brain to do something that mimics what our brain does. So you don't have to be a conscious being to write a poem that another conscious being will put meaning onto. So what's really interesting, and there are lots of poetry generators, sorry poets, but there are tons of poetry generators, and things like GPT-3 now, there's a site called gwern.net, which is really interesting, where they've generated all kinds of literary stuff. So writing poems in the style of Dr. Seuss, or in Percy Shelley, or in Lovecraft writing, and anything in the voice of these different poets. And so I think poetry is interesting, because even if you put up 3 lines or 3 words on Instagram, some people will say, oh, that's a pile of crap, and other people will say, oh wow, that's so meaningful. So I think poetry is an odd one because you can impose meaning on it regardless. And in fact, perhaps the more esoteric, the better. But the bigger challenge is, well, how do you write a coherent narrative that actually has some kind of meaning? And what I would say immediately is, remember, we are at GPT-3, and we can do this right now. So, for example, I told you about, in fact, I talked about on my podcast, I used a site called InfoKit. You can get some free tries at these things, and then you can pay like $40 a month to keep going. And the other site is shortlyai.com. And I've tried both of these for the creative writing, and essentially you put in a prompt. So I've been using a few lines of my own writing, so a short story, for example, copy and paste 3 lines into the tool, and then you press generate, and it will carry on writing. And what's interesting is you can adjust the sort of levels of how weird is this. And I did one where, if you press it like 4 or 5 times, you're going to get different responses to the same prompt, and some will be complete gobbledygook and some will be fascinating. So there was one particular output, I was reading it going, I can't believe that this was written by just that's something that doesn't have any thought. And I'm still kind of looking at this paragraph, wanting to riff off of that. And, it's something I'm still really thinking about. And I don't do that with a lot of human authors. So that in itself is fascinating. So I guess the other thing is I've had on my podcast so far, Jaya Wijjaratni, who's a Sri Lankan author who actually he's a programmer as well as a writer. He programmed various generators for weather and plot points and used GPT-2 to create AI poetry, which he used as the dialogue in his novel, The Salvage Crew, as the dialogue of the AI poet character. And he got a 2-book deal for that, a 2 or 3 book deal for that. And the audiobook is narrated by Nathan Fillion. So if you know Firefly, it's like, ooh, fangirl. So that's interesting because this is an author who was written and is traditionally published and got a book deal with the earlier version of GPT, that's GPT-2. So just a couple of other things before I let you speak. I've actually got some books here because I think the best way to go about this is to look at how other authors have done it. So this book's called On the Road, and it's like On the Road from Jack Kerouac, where essentially they put a camera and an AI generator in the back of the car, and Ross Goodwin, who's a sort of AI curious writer, drove where did they drive? New York to New Orleans, and it outputted basically this book, which they haven't really edited. It's more like a prose poem, I guess.
That's what they said about On the Road, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Capote said that's not writing, that's typing.
Well, there you go then. This is typing by a machine in the back of a car. But the one that is quite interesting is this one. It's called Pharmaco AI. And what is interesting with this book, it is written with GPT-3. It was written in 2020, so it's really new. And the prompts are in bold or a different typeface, so you can see what was a prompt and what was generated. And that to me is a kind of really interesting way of seeing, and this is let's call it literature, which is when some of it doesn't necessarily make sense.
Joanna, your definition of literary and literature, we need to work on them.
But as in, again, people put deeper meaning on things.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's not meant to be offensive. It's meant to be I don't know, it's just a type of writing, but then on a more commercial level, I've got lit RPG author Paul Bello is coming on my show soon to talk about how he's using GPT-3 in his publishing, and he's doing world generators and all kinds of things. And it's so interesting because I think the lit RPG community and the science fiction community are more used to this kind of thing, but those of us like in thrillers, I don't know anyone who's doing this, and probably in historical Irish time slip fiction, I mean, who knows? But
not yet.
Yeah.
But back to the poetry, actually, and the literary idea. What I found when I was doing my little play around was that it threw up very interesting, surprising. The whole thing with good poetry is that the imagery is surprising and it isn't conventional and cliched, and it kind of wakes you up. That's what good poetry does. It kind of wakes you out of your own fuzzy head and kind of knocks you into the world of the poem. And I found it extremely interesting. The imagery, the surprising images and the surprising word matches that were being thrown up. And I definitely am going to play with that a lot more. So I think actually for poetry, it's probably more there than for long form historical fiction, certainly at the moment. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. That's where we are. And I did also want to mention, I do some curation of stuff on my podcast, the Creative Pen podcast, but there is a up-to-date news on robotwritersai.com, which is a great newsletter. It comes out every week. And because this is what I think we're trying to say, this is changing so fast, and there are new tools literally almost every day, certainly every week. And the way this is moving, and as you know, we're not going to get into copyright law today, but we've talked about it before, but there basically is no copyright law that covers all of this stuff. So we have to come at it from a creative, possibility angle, like you're saying about the poetry, and like I'm looking at going, wow, this is fascinating. And so I think that's the most important thing, is that we have an open approach to it, as we would. That's why I like these books that I've got here. They are playful. I think we take everything so seriously, and the attitude of play is what I'm finding with these generators. It's like, oh, what if I put this in? I wonder what it will come up with, and going, oh no, that is terrible. Just press the button again and see what it does. And then, oh yeah, maybe I'll look at that sentence and think about that. So and Yudon Jaya actually said this on my podcast. He said it was a joy to create. And I don't know about many writers. I love being a writer, but I'm not sure I would use the word joy when it comes to the first draft. So yeah, I think very interesting.
Brilliant. If anybody has any questions, please do pop them into the chat, and we'll see if we get time for them. There's so much to talk about here. I know what people are going to be thinking now is, okay, that sounds interesting. I'm ready to give it a go. I'm feeling playful. I'm feeling up for some joy. How do we co-create, I should say, with a tool like GPT-3?
Well, I think what's interesting about the book, and first of all, I would say go and play. So, go to InfoKit, or go to my list of AI writing tools, and all of them have a free couple of goes, so you can have a look, try things out, do a bit of research. I'd think of it as a bit of research into the future. And then what I love about the Pharmaco AI book is they say in there that this is a hybrid disruption, a literary intervention that rails against stale conservative ideas about how we make books. And I was like, whoa, that's challenging. I mean, the fact I don't want to be called stale or conservative, that's not actually how I see myself. And so I love the idea of this. And they talk about the process of writing is beautifully intimate, even organic, a conversational approach. You enter the prompts, like we've talked about, and it generates responses. So then they talk about the iterative process of writing and pruning the output, and clusters of concepts emerged, and a vocabulary was born, a mapping of space, time, and language that points outside of all three. And I love that, because that's what we want to do. That is some beautiful writing about the process of co-creation with AI. So what I would say is what I've discovered, and as I said, I'm going to have Paul Bello on, and he's been doing this since GPT-3 came out. So I'm really going to quiz him on it. But a short prompt, so like a line from one of your poems, will output potentially a short something in the same vein. But a long prompt, so 300 to 600 words, is more interesting, because it will actually generate something more coherent, mimicking the tone and the style. So I think when I first got on, I started to put things like man with a blue hat, and expecting some kind of character description, for example. But actually, that's not what you do. It's more like, Thomas dug beneath the skeletal tree with his bloody spade, and then press enter, and it's going to continue in that vein. So you have to give it some sense of what it wants to continue writing, or want is the wrong word, but think of it as a comprehensive autocomplete that will carry on what you've started. So think of it as prompting. And what's interesting is around 90% is original, is what most of the models seem to say. It's not plagiarism. So even if, so for example, I had an output that had Voldemort in it, and I was like, that's from Harry Potter. They've plagiarized Harry Potter. And my husband said, no, there's so much Harry Potter fan fiction on the internet. That's probably what it is. But still, obviously, I personally am not going to put anything out with Voldemort in it. So curate, if you're going to publish, and to be honest, there's nothing stopping you, use a plagiarism checker, edit, and use the tools as we would use any other tool to enhance your skills, as humans have always done. Humans use tools. It's one of the things that make us human. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that I'm reading a book at the moment called New Laws of Robotics by Frank Pasquale, who says robotic systems and AI should complement professionals, not replace them. And he has this concept of intelligence augmentation, so IA instead of AI, which, you know, we both really like this idea. So think of it as augmenting your own intelligence. You have to drive it. It's like Google or YouTube. It doesn't just automatically do stuff. You have to start by putting your intent into the tool, and then it will feed things back to you. You have to prompt it in a certain direction. So I guess for me, it's about learning how to use these tools to enhance the creative side, but also remember, double down on being human, which we always say. Edit for your voice, curate for your audience, and remember that, you know, you're still you. You're not just pressing the button and hitting publish. That's not what we do. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yes, I like, and I think, as I said, there's a kind of a learning thing. I know that people are concerned about the fact that it's going to do away with jobs. So Angie is saying, my daughter is an SEO copywriter. To what extent do you think this is likely to threaten her job? She should embrace it, right? And Tom comes in, yes, embrace, no job, or for that matter, anything we humans take part in is static. And I know you agree with that. But what about people who are concerned and are thinking, you know, this is going to, why should I bother?
Yeah, well,
You
I
know,
think, yeah, and why should you bother? You don't have to bother. It really is like, if you still love handwriting your books into notepads, there's no law against that. You know, you don't have to use these tools. We're not saying that, in the same way that the last self-publishing advice conference wasn't saying you should use every tool on the internet. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is this is another suite of tools that is possible to be used by writers in order to augment us. So your daughter there, Angie, what I would do if I was your daughter is hi Angie. I know I've read Angie's thing in my in my survey. I remember her. So basically what I would say is, hey, here's a list of all the tools that you could possibly use to make your work easier. And this is what translation professionals are doing too, is using AI to get rid of the bulk of the work that doesn't need their human touch and focus on the more interesting part. And that's what, coming back to Kevin Kelly said, you know, you'll be paid in the future based on how well you work with robots or work with AI. So if you can be an SEO copywriter who can produce really quality work in half the time, or the same amount of time, and still be paid, you know, she could do something else with her time while still paid the same amount of money.
Write
a book or do something else. You know, that's what we're talking about. It really is a case of optimizing how we want to live our lives, rather than saying this is what you must do. And that's why I want to have this open, I think quite childlike, to be honest. I think I'm pretty childlike around this stuff, which is curious and interested and playful, and not to be afraid. And, you know, you see it with like my nieces. They're not afraid of an iPad or an Alexa. Whereas we're like, oh, what do I say? How do I say that? Or maybe I'll get it wrong. And they're like not even bothered. If the Alexa doesn't respond in the right way, they'll ask it in a different way, and they won't even flinch. They'll just carry on. So that's kind of how I want us to see this, is, well, let's just play with this and see how we could use it. And perhaps it will benefit us, or we just say, no, do you know what? I'm not going to do that. Maybe Orna will write a book of AI assisted poetry and then do one that is just handwritten on some in lovely printed paper or something. You know, that we can do all these things because we're human. I mean, the AI doesn't want anything. We get to choose.
Absolutely. And because we're indie, I think that's part of it. To me, it's very much an extension. You know, all the attitudes you're talking about there, curiosity, playfulness, openness, they're the absolute core of what it is to be creative. And every creative moment is like that. And as independent authors, we're going to take hold of this rather than feeling defeated by it. I mean, I remember when people were feeling defeated by ebooks. Ebooks were going to be the end of everything, and we saw how that went. So I very much feel that this is in the same vein. And thank you so much for bringing all your learnings and encouraging everybody, to have good conversations about this in our community. So you are really doing a ton of work. First of all, tell people the name of your book, and then tell them where they can find out and keep appraised of what's happening as you go out there and find out for us.
All right. Well, I actually have a tiny little book. Look, it's really thin.
It's packed full of goodies.
It's got a lot of so this is artificial intelligence, blockchain, and virtual worlds. There is a chapter on writing with AI, and there's a chapter on voice and obviously blockchain and other things. But I have I'm also doing a lot of interviews on my podcast, the Creative Penn podcast, and I'm linking to everything at thecreativepenn.com/future. Where I'm doing conversations with other creatives, and I'm kind of doing them in the midweeks in between my main podcast, because I know not everyone's interested. So I'm doing different ones, and I've got interviews coming up, as I said, with Paul Bello, who's writes for GPT-3 in the lit RPG space, as well as a professor who's got a book on creativity and AI. So I'm really trying to cover different angles. And again, that list of AI writing tools is at thecreativepenn.com/AI writing. So I suggest you start there if you want to have a little play and a little think about things.
Fantastic. And we'll have the list of all of those links and some of the resources that you've mentioned also on the podcast show notes on Friday on the blog at selfpublishingadvice.org/podcast. So thank you so much for all that you're doing here. We're right out of time, folks. But until next time.
Well, we should tell people what we're doing next time, because that's what we normally do.
Oh, yes. Okay, then.
So next month in March, we are going craft, and we are doing indie authors literary prizes and awards. And we'll be talking about, both of us have been in judging situations with different awards, and we're really going to talk about what is the point? Are these things important? And do indie authors stand a chance? And what are the types of books that do well in these things? So I'm really excited about that, because that's something on my list. Like, one of the things I want to achieve is to be an award-winning author. I'm award nominated. It's just not good enough. So this is like me personally. This is what I want to cover next month on the show. And of course, we can have literary ambition. It's completely fine. But that's coming up next month. So Orna, anything else you want to mention for the Alliance?
No, just to say that there's lots on that particular topic, and we'll be talking about, the difference between indie awards and other awards and our ratings page and so on. So it's not just about Joanna winning an award.
Or people listening. That's what it will be around.
So thank you for listening today. And we'll see you next time, and have a play with some AI in between.
Happy writing.
And publishing. Bye-bye now.
Bye.